My name is Cody Owen. I work out of the Orlando, Florida office, and today I'm going to be going through just the kind of the basic rundown of the kind of the everyday use inside of SolidWorks PDM. Some of you may be new to the product, and so I want to talk a little bit about what it is and how it can help out your organization. So the SolidWorks PDM, well, what is it? Well, it's a product data management tool. You can manage all sorts of kind of data inside of it. It doesn't matter if a SolidWorks part, drawing, assembly file. You can go through and you can manage PDFs. You can manage Office, like Microsoft Office documents, Word documents, Excel, such and so forth. Even PDFs. So really, what it is it's a really good tool to being able to manage all of those different products for you. So what is it going to do is it's really going to be able to add some structure to your organization because, you know, it's not just this big, huge file explorer folder that you're just going to dump a bunch of stuff in. You know, we want to add some structure to it. We want to be able to make that a little easier to navigate. And all of that is kind of capable of doing all of that inside SolidWorks PDM. So how easy is it going to be for you to use? Well, if you've been using Windows File Explorer for the last few years or so, it's going to be very easy to pick up because it's based off of Windows File Explorer. You definitely have a few more options available to you, but it's basically a really fancy version of that. And so how can it improve your current work? And you may be really thinking about that and you're like, well, there's a lot of tools built in to the SolidWorks PDM that allows you to, you know, to help with if there's any kind of audits, if you have any kind of file searching where you have to go through and search for stuff like to the nth degree and you can't find it, well, that tool is going to help you out with that. So speaking of that search capability, that's one of the 4 items that SolidWorks PDM kind of excels in, is being able to search and sort through different files. So take, for instance, if you're using File Explorer right now, you log into it, you open it up and you search for something on the C drive. Well, probably, you know, you go to search for something, it's going to take a few minutes for it to pop up. And that can be very frustrating, just sitting there and just waiting. So what SolidWorks PDM does is it uses a SQL-based search engine, and all the data is stored in there. And so when you go through and you search for something, you get results back almost immediately. So it's really helpful when it comes to going through and searching through documents. The other thing is that you can actually introduce a revision control inside of the workflow itself. And so what that means is that there's no more having to go back and making sure that you have the correct revision on your revision scheme, on your drawing or your part. You can actually set up an action in the workflow that'll automatically increase that revision for you, say from B to C or 5 to 6. You can have that so you can automatically get that done for you, and you don't have to go back and do that yourself. So, and I was talking about adding some structure, some like folder structure. You can go through and you can set up different tasks inside of the SolidWorks PDM to allow you to create a folder structure for a project, and you can have that same folder structure applied to multiple projects by right-clicking, adding a new folder, naming the project, giving the project name, who owns it, such and so forth, all that data that you want to kind of have go along with that project. And what it'll do is it'll create subfolders inside of that project for, say, your CAD models, one for PDFs, one for pictures, you know, just anything that you have available that you need to make sure and document yourself. And once that's completed, then everybody knows exactly where to put everything. So there's no question about where do I put this file after I get this completed. All that goes out the window. And the other big thing is to be able to have a secure vault. So all of this information that you've got inside of your project, inside of whatever that you're working on, it's going to have you're going to have a login to even access it to begin with. So if you don't have an access to the PDM tool itself, then you can't just go searching through it. So it's not like File Explorer in that sense. So all of this and thinking about all these different tools that you have to go through and that you're working with now with the search, having to wait for the search, having to do all the revision control manually, creating that folder structure manually, maybe even having to hire an IT company to come in and help with securing your information. All of this is costing you so much time and money, and that's roughly like 25% of all of the time and resources on average. So what we're going to do today is we're going to get into some of that everyday use inside of the SolidWorks PDM. And these are the 5 subjects that we're going to work with. I'm going to start with the interface. So like I mentioned earlier, when I look at the interface, I'm going to go down here, click on my File Explorer button, and I'm going to launch File Explorer. So to access that vault that I have set up, I'm going to click on this little blueberry icon over here on the side, and it's going to get that logged in for me. And what I can do is over here on the right hand side of the screen, you can see that I had this open. I'd logged into it previously, and if I go to log out, I'll just kind of show you what that login screen is going to look like. If I log out of it, it's going to shut down File Explorer to check this out. When I go to log back into it, it's going to ask me for my credentials. So if you don't have those credentials up front, you're not going to be able to access it. So let's log back into it, and I'll show you some more of the interface inside of this. First thing you're going to notice is that little green folder icon. That's not that little manila like color that you're used to seeing inside of File Explorer. So that's a dead giveaway that you're looking and working inside of a vault. But you're going to notice that you have a ton of different information inside of this vault itself. So if I take, for instance, if I click on this 4240 spreader, just the folder itself, I can go through and I can look at different information that I have available inside of this. I can especially look at this little data card. And this data card that you see here in the bottom of the screen is just something that you have available to you to look at the project number, project name. This was kind of set up for this project folder itself. All this stuff is customizable. You can pull whatever information you want in there. So let's go a little deeper into it. I'm going to go inside this folder, and let's look at this arm, for example. So I'm looking at a SolidWorks part, and inside of that SolidWorks part, there's a ton of information right here at my fingertips that I don't have to open up the SolidWorks part and SolidWorks itself, none of that. And what I have is that I have the part number, the description, the material, who created it. Then it's just any kind of data that you want recorded on this for this part that goes along with the part, you can show that inside the data card. This one's pretty complex. It doesn't have to be this have this much information. You can put as little or as much information on there as you want. So going back to looking at the interface, just logging in, making sure that you have that secure login, and then being able to see that all that data is very, very little interface that you have to get used to, and you get to see so much information that goes into it. All right, so the next thing we're going to talk about is version control. So I'm going to tab back over to my File Explorer, and we're going to look at this versions. So each time that you have a part or a file inside of the PDM and you check it in, you're actually checking it in, and it's saving a copy of what you were working on in your machine onto the server, and where the PDM database where it lives, basically. And with that, all of that information is stored on that card. So take, for instance, I'm looking at this arm, and I see that it's version 5 of 5. I'm like, wow, it's been checked into the vault at least 5 times. So that's pretty good to know. Let's look at another one, for example. This one's being checked in 9 times, and I can see that it's a top level assembly. It's got that part in it. Check this out. What I can do is I can go up here to the history, and I can click on the history of this file. And this is just all the information that every time it was checked in, who checked it in, when it was checked in, and then also why. They added a comment over there on the right hand side, and you can see exactly what was performed at each step along this process with this particular part. So it went from, and when Neil he brought it into the looks like he brought it into the vault. looks like Cody came along and he went in there and made some changes to it, checked it in, and then it looks like it went into Mark's hands. And Mark is one of the managers on the team. He went in there and approved the design and went on up the tree. So just think about that for a second, and being able to look at the history on this. If you ever work with any kind of government contractors, and they're like, and they have to set up like an audit or something like that, they need to see everything that happened to a particular part. Right here, you can pull this up and you can actually hit the little print button and you can print this thing off. It's that easy. It's so much information lies right inside of the history of this. It's very, very, very easy to find, and that kind of information is just priceless to know how it was constructed. So going back to that version control, being able to see the history, who did what and when, and then possibly also why, that information is just priceless. All right. So now let's talk a little bit about the search capabilities inside of SolidWorks PDM. So I'm going to go back over to my folder, and inside of this folder, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up here to the top hand corner of the screen, and I'm just going to perform a complete search. And I mentioned this earlier, you know, it uses the SQL database, and so anytime you perform a search, it's almost immediate, right? We'll check this out. So I'm looking at a name and location, and I'm just looking for the letter A in something. All right, I'm going to click the start button to search and check that out. Check out all these files that just came in instantly that had the letter A in the name. How long do you think that would have taken in files for, right? It would have, you'd still be waiting and waiting and waiting. So the search engine in this is just fantastic. This is one of the primary reasons that everybody loves the PDM and loves using it. I know I've been a user since 2014, and I couldn't imagine a day without using this product. Just being able to search something. But anyways, getting back to the search engine here, you can look for stuff in the name. You can look for, you know, certain characters or whatever in the description. But just want to let you know that each one of these are kind of like an and condition. So it's going to look for the name, and it's going to look for something in the description, and it's going to look for the number. And that not only applies to this one tab that we're looking at here, but it also applies to all of these other tabs that you see here in the background. Take, for instance, these are all of the data cards that I have built into this Homatro vault. And say, for instance, if I wanted to look at something on a particular drawing card, I could go in here and I could pick who I wanted to, you know, whoever created it. And it would show who created it. I would hit the search, and it would be narrowed down by that person that created it. One other thing I like to show a lot here is the checked in and checked out tab. This one's really, really powerful because it lets you know exactly who has what checked out, and it's just a matter of choosing somebody's name. I'm going to go back over here and I'm going to take off the A, and I'm going to search. So looks like Cody's got 2 parts checked out right now. And the why I tell you that this is very, very powerful, very important to be able to use, is that when you have a part checked out, it's basically you've taken ownership of it. Nobody else can really use that part and make any modifications, anything like that. So at the end of the day, if you go through and you pick your name out of the list and you see that you've got 100 parts checked out, if you're not working on them at the time, it's probably a good idea to go ahead and check them back in case somebody else needs to be able to work on those parts, whatever files it could be. So I really like being able to show that one, because that one, to me, especially for the people that administer the PDM, this is really, really important for them. So that's a little bit about the search. Let's see. I'll go back over here and we'll look at all of those files right there at your fingertips. Just a click of a button and you can see anything and everything that's in there. Just so fast. It's great. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit more about the workflow. I kind of halfway mentioned it a little while ago, but I want to look at it a little bit more in depth to be able to show you what I mean by adding a little bit more structure to your environment. So in order to look at that, I'm going to go ahead and launch my PDM admin tool. And inside of here, I'm going to look inside my vault. I have to be able to log into this vault to be able to even use this product. So after I log in, I'm going to go down here and I'm going to look at my default workflow, and I'll maximize this for everybody. Okay, so this is more or less your typical workflow, and this is what's going to add a lot more structure to your organization, being able to know exactly what state a part is in and what state that we want it to be in the end. Obviously, you want it to be in this, like in a release state. It's released for production. We can manufacture a ton of these things. We want to get it to that state as fast as we can. So inside of this workflow, if you have a brand new part, we'll take that for example, just a brand new part, it goes into this initial state here, this under editing state. So this will be the state that, you know, one of the engineers is working on it. They checked it in. They're like, hey, this is ready to go. I need for somebody to approve it for me. So they transition it to this next state, waiting for approval. And not all organizations is going to need like a manager's approval or you know, like a engineering manager or something like that approval. Maybe it needs to go to like a QA for a quality check. So it wouldn't necessarily have to go to a manager in you know, in this case for that approval process, but instead a quality engineer. And so after whomever that is that gets that in their hands, they look at it and they can send it on to the next step, which would be past approval into this approved state. So you may be wondering, like, what are these little bells that you see next to these guys right here? Well, that is so that way it'll actually create a notification to allow the managers or the quality engineers, whomever that may be, to say, hey, you know, I'm the engineer, I'm Cody, I'm working on this, I'm finished with it. I want to send this over for Mark to check. Well, as soon as I send it, I can actually write a note in a comment and say, hey, Mark, I'm finished with this. Could you check it out, make sure everything's okay with it? And he gets that notification, you know, within a minute. So what is that going to do is it's not going to have to sit in limbo. That part's not going to have to sit in that waiting for approval state forever. You don't have to go around and find them to track them down, because you can either have it set up so that way as soon as he logs into the PDM, he'll see that notification, or you can even set up email to have an email notification. And once it goes to that state and he sees it, he's like, oh, okay, he can go through it, he can quickly approve it. Once he approves it, this notification here will send it to, say, like a documentation type scenario, or we're the documentation team. So they can take it and they can, say for instance, they're working like on an owner's manual where they have to go through and they have to update some parts or something like that inside the owner's manual. They can go through, they can take images of whatever they're working with and make sure that it's updated for their PDF, and they're good to go. And so they can also get that notification as well, so that way it can get to market a lot faster. So that's going from the creation part that's just created from scratch into the approval process. And that same kind of scenario works if it's an approved process and it needs to go through an engineering change. And so you would request a change, it would go to this under change state, which is very similar to the under editing state above. Once the engineer finishes working on it, finishes adding those approvals, then it goes to the approval state. And then once it's approved, it can go back to a release state again. So this workflow is what everybody kind of needs to be on board with. That's what's going to add the structure to the environment, to your organization. And anybody and everybody is going to be able to look at something and say, oh, it's in the under editing state. You know, so-and-so is probably still working on it. Oh, it's in waiting for approval. Oh, the market needs to probably take a look at it and get it worked on. And also, one last thing I want to mention here on this workflow is, remember I was talking about the revision control earlier, to be able to automatically increase the revision, so that way you don't have to go back and manually do it. You can actually perform that action inside of this past approval transition. So as soon as the manager says, yep, it's approved, they can right click on it, and whatever revision it's at, B or C or D or whatever it may be, it'll just increase it to D, E, or F, and you're good to go. So that's one last thing I wanted to add to this workflow as well. So going back and talking about, just a couple things here is just it reinforces a lot of those procedures to make sure everybody's on the same wavelength, that everybody's doing well, and they know exactly what to do and when to do it, and also that automatic revision scheme to let that thing automatically update for you with no time being wasted there. All right. So the last thing I want to talk about is these bill of materials. So let's go back to our File Explorer and take a look at one of these assemblies that we see here. And I'm going to go down here to that bill of materials tab. So inside of this, you can see that all of the parts that are associated with this assembly are right as you see here. You see the name of it, the part number, even the quantity, and that state that it's in, that approved state, that release state, to let you know that it's ready for production. So you don't necessarily have to have SolidWorks to be able to open these things up and to be able to use these tools. You can be just a viewer. I could, if I had my assembly hat on, I'm one of the guys that works in the assembly and the manufacturing floor, and I want to go through and build my part list, and so that way I can go through and knock out about 5 or 6 of these handle assemblies. So I would be able to see exactly the quantities that I needed of each part, and I can go through and grab them. Also, if I was working in the purchasing department and I needed to go through and order the raw materials for all of these things that needs to be created, I can go through here and I can build this list. I can even go over here and save it out as a CSV, or a CVS rather, and that way I can take that into Excel and be able to export it out if that was my methodology, if that's how I wanted to, how I use the tools and the purchasing. So yeah, there's a bunch of different ways other people that can use this that aren't just CAD users that can use this tool. One thing I want to mention here that doesn't get talked about a lot is the where used. When I was in manufacturing, I used this almost every day, because there was a point where I was having to go through and I was having to recreate parts that had already been created, and I was wasting time doing that, and I didn't know I was wasting time. I didn't know that at the time. So once I was introduced to this and I had a little bit more training on it, I figured out how to use it. And what I was doing was I was going through and recreating parts that was already there, and some of those parts were, say, obsolete, that weren't being used in anywhere else in production. And so I was able to go in here, I was able to use my search engine, I was able to search for the part, and I found the part, and I saw that it had an obsolete state on it. And I was like, oh, well, that's not being used for anything. And I looked at where it was used, and I noticed, like, in the top level assemblies, that all of these assemblies were also obsolete as well. And so I could take that part and I could use it for something else instead of having to go back and create it from scratch. So that ended up saving me probably countless days or weeks even of going through and recreating stuff that I didn't have to. And I was able to use this where used tab to see where it was used. I found that it wasn't in production anymore, or it would never be in production anymore. And I was able to take it and make it my own and reuse it. So something I just kind of want to throw in there as far as with the bill of materials, because sometimes you need to be able to find exactly all the parts that you have in your database and be able to reuse them if possible and save time and money there. So just as a little bit of a recap on the bill of materials, you can get in there, you can look at the latest and greatest of what SolidWorks has inside the vault, and of all the parts and pieces inside the assembly. And you don't have to necessarily be a CAD user to be able to view all of this. So just as a recap, we've looked at several things inside of the SolidWorks PDM today, with the interface, showing how easy it was to access it, showing that version control, seeing the history. The big kicker on that's the history, using that search engine to be able to go through and quickly search everything that you see and knock everything out. Also seeing that workflow, adding that structure to your organization and reinforcing those procedures in place. That way everybody knows exactly what they're doing when they're supposed to be doing it, and helping them get it done. Last but not least, the bill of materials. So just as a some of the things that you can get out of this is you can really help streamline your organization. Once everybody knows exactly what they're supposed to be doing, and with that structure, with that workflow, you can really get it done very quickly. And as well as that effective communication, being able to see those notifications come in via the workflow and say, hey, Cody finished this one. It's time for, Mark is looking at it like, oh, okay, I need to go in there and check it out, make sure everything's okay with it, and get that thing approved so that way we can get it out and get it released for production. And the last but not least there is being able to see the history on everything. That way you have accountability of who did what, when, and why. And really, all of this in the end is going to save a lot of time and money, which is, let's be real, it's pretty priceless.